I still remember the night everything changed, the night my world went completely dark. One moment I was begging him to stop, and the next I woke up in a hospital bed, hearing nurses whisper that my husband had heroically saved my life. Heroically, the same man who had put me there. Before I tell you how I discovered the truth, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I always love to see how far these stories travel. When you live with fear long enough, it starts to sound normal. For 15 years, I told myself that the shouting, the slamming doors, the bruises hidden under sleeves were all part of marriage. Mark was charming to everyone else, the man who carried groceries for neighbors, the colleague who brought coffee for interns. But behind closed doors, his kindness turned into something darker. It always began the same way. A small mistake. Dinner too cold. Shirt not ironed. Then came the sigh, the silence, and finally, the storm. People often ask, "Why didn't you leave?" The answer is simple. You can't leave a cage you don't realize you're in. He made me believe that I was nothing without him, that I was weak, fragile, incapable. And slowly, I started to believe it. That winter, things got worse. Mark lost his job, and the anger that once came in waves now lived permanently in the house. He'd pace the living room, muttering about respect and obedience, and every night I prayed silently for one calm evening. Then came that night. I had burned dinner, just slightly, a few edges of the roast too crisp. Mark's face went red instantly. "You can't do anything right, can you?" he said, his voice low, dangerous. I apologized again and again, but it didn't matter. The last thing I remember was the crash of a plate and his voice shouting my name, not out of concern, but fury. Then, darkness. When I woke up, the world smelled of disinfectant and beeping monitors. A nurse leaned over me with a sympathetic smile. "You're lucky your husband found you in time," she whispered. My husband. Lucky. Mark was sitting by the window, face pale, eyes red from fake tears. When he saw me awake, he stood, brushing invisible dust off his sleeves. "Thank God," he breathed, acting the part of the devoted husband. The doctors believed him. They always do. They said I had collapsed from stress and dehydration. Mark nodded solemnly and signed the papers. For the next few days, he barely left my side. He brought flowers, read devotionals aloud, held my hand when nurses walked in. Everyone called him the sweetest husband, but I knew that sweetness. I had tasted its poison for years. On the third night, when he thought I was asleep, I heard him speaking softly near the door. "She's fine," he said. "Just keep the story straight." My pulse raced. Who was he talking to? The next morning, a woman from social services arrived. She smiled kindly and asked, "Do you feel safe at home?" Mark squeezed my hand before I could answer. "Yes," I said automatically, "completely safe." The lie left a bitter taste on my tongue. That afternoon, when Mark went to get lunch, the nurse came in to change my IV. She leaned close and whispered, "You don't have to go home if you're not ready." Her eyes told me she knew, but fear is louder than kindness, and fear won again. 2 days later, Mark drove me home. He played the part perfectly, opened doors, carried my bag, even hummed softly as we entered the house. Inside, everything was spotless, as if nothing had happened. New curtains, fresh candles, a vase of white lilies on the table, my favorite flowers, though he hated their scent. "See?" he said, smiling. "We're starting over." I nodded, forcing a small smile. But deep down, something inside me had shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't just scared, I was watching. Days passed. Mark acted like a saint. He cooked, cleaned, even called my sister to update her. "He's changed," my sister whispered on the phone. Maybe the accident was a wake-up call. I wanted to believe her, but the truth doesn't stay buried for long. One evening, I was in the living room when Mark's phone buzzed. He was in the shower. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. A message flashed on the screen. Delete the footage. She can't find out. Footage? My hands trembled as I opened the message thread. There were videos, short clips, and then a final text. Upload scheduled, set to private just in case. I clicked the link. The video opened to a dimly lit kitchen, our kitchen. Mark's voice filled the room. She fell, he said, breathless. I'm calling an ambulance. But the frame caught a flash, his hand pushing me, my head hitting the counter. I froze. My whole body went cold. He had filmed it. He had filmed everything, then staged the rescue. I felt the air leave my lungs. He wasn't just pretending to be my savior. He was building evidence, making himself look like the hero in case I ever told the truth. I quickly forwarded the file to my own email, deleted the message, and placed the phone back exactly where it was. When Mark came out of the shower, steam trailing behind him, I smiled. For the first time in years, it was genuine, not from love, but from quiet power. He looked at me suspiciously. What's funny? Nothing, I said softly. I just realized how lucky I am. That night, I didn't sleep. I waited until he started snoring, then crept to the study. I copied every file, every message, every photo onto a flash drive. By dawn, I had everything, proof of years of manipulation, of lies, of cruelty. When the sun rose, I made coffee. He came into the kitchen, kissed my forehead, and said, "See? We're happy again." I smiled again, the last smile I would ever give him under that roof. Because that morning, I called Detective Harris, the same officer who had once believed Mark's stories. "Ma'am," he said, skeptical, "do you have evidence?" "Yes," I replied calmly, "enough to end his act forever." I didn't sleep the night after I called the detective. Every sound in the house felt amplified, the creak of the floorboards, the ticking clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator. I kept hearing his voice in my head, the way he said, "We're happy again," as if those words could erase everything he'd done. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I was calculating. Detective Harris called me the next morning. "Mrs. Carter, can you meet me this afternoon? Bring whatever you mentioned on the phone." I glanced toward the hallway. Mark was shaving, humming to himself. "Yes," I whispered. "I'll be there at 2." When he left for the grocery store later that day, I slipped the flash drive into my coat pocket and walked to the bus stop. For the first time in years, I felt the air on my face and realized how long it had been since I'd gone anywhere without permission. Even the bus driver's smile felt like freedom. At the station, Detective Harris met me with a file under his arm. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "I'll be honest, ma'am. Last time you called, I thought you were exaggerating. But what you've given me, it's serious." He plugged in the flash drive. The screen lit up with Mark's staged recordings, the push, the fake rescue, the panic he'd performed. When the video ended, Harris let out a slow breath. "He planned this. He made sure everyone thought you were unstable." I nodded. "That's what he does best. Makes lies look like love." Harris leaned back in his chair. "We'll handle this quietly. I'll need a written statement, and I'll arrange protection for you. Do not go back home tonight." My throat tightened. He'll know something's wrong if I don't. "Then act normal. Go back today, collect a few things, and I'll have a safe place ready by tomorrow." On the way home, I rehearsed my calm face in the bus window. By the time I stepped through the door, Mark was in the kitchen unpacking groceries. "There you are," he said cheerfully. "Where'd you go?" I forced a small laugh. "Just needed some air. Thought I'd walk a little." He handed me a tomato and smiled. "See? Fresh start, right?" I nodded, pretending to admire it, while inside, I was counting hours until I could leave for good. That night, I made his favorite dinner. He ate, happily, complimenting me as though he hadn't nearly destroyed me months before. When he went to the living room to watch TV, I slipped into the bedroom and quietly packed a small bag, just essentials and the old photo of my mother I kept on the dresser. I hid the bag under the bed. Around midnight, my phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. Everything's ready. Don't let him see you leave. H. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. This was it. But before I could reply, the floor creaked behind me. Mark stood in the doorway, half smiling. Who are you texting so late? My mouth went dry. It's just my sister. She couldn't sleep. He walked closer, the smile fading. Let me see the phone. For a second, I thought he'd grab it, but I slipped it into my robe pocket and said softly, Mark, you don't trust me even now? That hesitation, those few seconds of pride, saved me. He sighed, turned around and muttered, Just don't keep secrets, Juliet. When his footsteps faded down the hall, I locked myself in the bathroom, my hands trembling. I texted back quickly, Leaving in 10 minutes. Please be close. At 12:40 a.m., I opened the back door. The cold hit my face like truth. A car waited down the street with its lights off. I walked fast, every nerve alive, the gravel crunching under my shoes. As soon as I got in, Detective Harris looked at me and said, You're safe now. The next morning, I woke up in a small guest room inside a women's shelter. The walls were painted pale blue, the kind of color that doesn't ask questions. A volunteer brought me tea. You did the hardest part, she said softly. But the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was knowing he'd wake up to an empty bed and realize the game was over. 2 days later, Harris called again. We've reviewed the footage. It's enough to press charges, but we need to move carefully. He's clever. That word haunted me. I had seen clever every day of my marriage. Clever lies, clever smiles, clever traps. That evening, Harris came to the shelter with another officer. He asked me to describe everything, the control, the threats, the staged rescue. As I spoke, I felt something strange happen. My fear began turning into anger. Every word I said out loud took back a piece of myself that Mark had stolen. When we finished, Harris nodded. We'll handle the arrest discreetly. He won't see it coming. And he didn't. 3 mornings later, Mark's perfect world cracked. He was watering the front lawn when police cars pulled up quietly. A neighbor filmed it on her phone, thinking it was some mix-up. By the time he realized they were there for him, Harris was already reading him his rights. The next call I got was from Harris. He's in custody. We recovered more videos from a hidden drive, same pattern. It wasn't just you, Mrs. Carter. I froze. What do you mean? He sighed. There are recordings of other women. Neighbors, colleagues. It seems he's been manipulating people for years. You might have saved more than yourself. That night, I sat by the window of the shelter, watching the rain slide down the glass. For the first time in 15 years, I didn't have to flinch at footsteps or second-guess my breath. I whispered to the empty room, You can't pretend to be a savior anymore. A week later, I stood in court. Mark wouldn't look at me. His lawyer spoke about stress, mental health, misunderstandings. But when Harris played the video, the shove, the fake rescue, the staged call for help, the room went silent. Even the judge's eyes darkened. Mark's mask cracked at last. When the verdict came, guilty on multiple counts, he turned toward me with the same face he used to wear after every argument, the face that begged for pity. But I didn't flinch this time. I simply said, You taught me fear. Now I know strength. When it was over, I walked out into the sunlight. The city noise felt louder than ever, buses, laughter, birds, but none of it frightened me. The world hadn't changed. A few months later, I reopened my old art studio. I painted the same window that had once felt like a prison. Now it was a symbol of freedom, a square of sky and possibility. One afternoon, a young woman from the shelter visited. She looked fragile, lost. I heard your story, she said quietly. How did you do it? I handed her a cup of tea and replied, By remembering that pretending to be a savior doesn't make a man one. And by learning that even in the darkest rooms, you can always find a door. I thought the hardest part would be testifying in court. It wasn't. The hardest part was learning how to live without fear, without glancing over my shoulder every time I heard a key in a lock. At the shelter, The staff encouraged us to write letters we'd never send. Letters to the people who had hurt us, betrayed us, made us feel small. That's when I realized something painful. I'd never really told Mark how deeply he'd broken me. So one night, I sat down with a pen, the smell of cheap coffee in the air, and wrote, "You used to call me Juliet when you wanted to sound loving. You said you couldn't live without me, yet you crushed everything that made me alive. Every bruise you gave me, you kissed later and said it was love. But now I know you only kissed to hide the evidence. I'm not your Juliet anymore. I'm the woman you couldn't destroy. I didn't send it. I didn't have to. That letter was for me, not for him." A few weeks later, the shelter arranged therapy sessions for survivors. The first time I spoke, my voice trembled so much I barely got through my story. But the woman next to me, a grandmother with scars on her hands, squeezed my arm and said softly, "You made it here. That means you already won." That one sentence changed something in me. It was the first time someone called surviving a victory. Months passed. I found a small apartment on the east side of the city. Nothing fancy, just quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't hurt. I painted again, cooked for myself, even started volunteering at the shelter once a week. But there was one thing I hadn't done: visit my mother's grave. Mark had forbidden me from going there. He said cemeteries were a waste of time. But one spring morning, I took a bus to the hillside cemetery and found her name carved in stone, Margaret Carter. The flowers I'd left 3 years ago were long gone. I knelt down, whispered, "Mom, I finally did it." I left him. For a moment, the wind brushed against my face, soft, almost like her hand. It felt like peace. When I got home that day, there was an envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name in neat handwriting. Inside was a letter from Mark's lawyer. "Dear Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter wishes to apologize and proposes a private meeting to discuss closure." Closure. I almost laughed. Men like him didn't want closure. They wanted control. Still, part of me needed to hear what he'd say when he wasn't in court. So I called Detective Harris first. He listened quietly, then said, "Meet him, but not alone. We'll have eyes nearby." The meeting was at a public park, open and sunny. Mark sat on a bench under a tree, looking thinner, paler, but his eyes were the same. "The kind that studied you, looking for weakness. Juliet," he said softly as I sat down. "You look good." I didn't respond. I just stared at him. He sighed. "I wanted to tell you that I'm getting therapy. I've changed. I regret everything." "Do you?" I asked quietly. "Or do you just regret being caught?" He flinched. Just a flicker, but I saw it. "You always think the worst of me," he muttered. "You make me into a monster." I leaned forward. "You are a monster, Mark, but I'm not your victim anymore." He tried to smile. "You think people will really believe you were perfect?" I smiled back, not the scared kind, but the knowing kind. "They don't need to. They saw the video." His expression changed, dark and sharp. "Do you know what it's like to lose everything?" He snapped. "Yes," I said. "I lived that way for 15 years. Now it's your turn." I stood up, ready to leave, when he said something that froze me. "You think this is over, Juliet? You think you can erase me?" I turned back slowly. "You already erased yourself." I walked away without looking back, my steps steady, my hands no longer shaking. And in the distance, I saw Detective Harris watching from his car, nodding once. That night, I slept without nightmares for the first time. No screams, no pounding heart, no footsteps in the dark. Just quiet, real, healing quiet. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, I received another call from Harris. "Mrs. Carter, are you sitting down?" My stomach dropped. What happened? "Mark escaped his mandatory rehab program last night." I froze, gripping the phone. "He might come looking for you. Stay somewhere safe. We'll find him." Every part of my body went cold. I checked my locks twice, shut every window, and left the lights on that night. But deep down, I knew something he didn't. I wasn't the same woman he used to control. If he came for me again, he wouldn't find fear. He'd find fire. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the walls made my heart skip. Every shadow that passed the window made me tighten my grip on the phone. But morning came, and nothing happened. By the third day, the fear started turning into something else. Anger. Not wild, screaming anger, but cold, focused determination. If Mark wanted a war, I was ready. I packed a small suitcase and went to stay with a friend from the shelter, Lisa. She lived 2 towns over, in a quiet apartment surrounded by flowers and sunlight. When I told her what had happened, she didn't flinch. "Then we keep you safe," she said simply, "and we make sure he never gets close again." For the next few weeks, I lived like a ghost moving between safe houses. Detective Harris checked in daily. Each time his voice was steady, grounding. "We'll catch him, Juliet. He's running out of places to hide." Then one night, everything changed. I was helping Lisa make dinner when my phone buzzed, an unknown number. For a second, I thought it was Harris again. But when I answered, the voice that came through froze my blood. "Did you miss me, Juliet?" It was him. Mark. I didn't speak. I just looked at Lisa, who immediately grabbed her own phone to call Harris. "Why are you doing this?" I finally said. He laughed softly. "Because you belong to me, and you forgot that." "No," I whispered. "I remembered who I am. That's why I left." He said something else, but I couldn't hear it clearly over Lisa's trembling whisper into the other phone. Then the line went dead. Within 15 minutes, police cars surrounded the neighborhood. They traced the call, a payphone 10 blocks away. But by the time officers got there, he was gone. That night, I couldn't close my eyes. The memories replayed like a movie I couldn't pause. The shouting, the breaking glass, the way he'd call me his angel right after hurting me. He thought he owned me. He thought fear was stronger than freedom. He was wrong. A week later, Harris called again. They had found Mark, injured after a car crash 2 states away. He'd been living under a false name, hiding in motels. He would face new charges for violating his probation. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just sat down quietly and breathed, really breathed, for what felt like the first time in years. Freedom didn't feel like fireworks or celebration. It felt like stillness, like sitting in sunlight without flinching. Months passed. I started working at the Community Arts Center, teaching painting to women rebuilding their lives. We never asked each other what we'd survived. We didn't need to. Our silence was a language of its own. One afternoon, I stayed late to clean up brushes when a little girl from the next class came running in. "Miss Juliet, there's a man outside asking for you," she said. My chest tightened. "What does he look like?" "He's old," she said quickly. "Has a badge." It was Harris. He smiled faintly when I stepped outside. "Sorry to scare you," he said. "I wanted to tell you in person. Mark's case is closed. He took a plea deal. He won't bother you again." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I just said, "Thank you." He nodded, then hesitated. "You've come a long way, Juliet. Don't stop now." After he left, I walked home under the orange evening sky. The city smelled like rain and warm bread from the bakery on the corner. Every sound felt softer, less threatening. I passed a window and caught my reflection. Hair grown longer, shoulders straighter, eyes no longer hollow. That night, I wrote one final letter. Not to Mark, to myself. "Dear Juliet, you survived the storm. You learned that strength isn't loud, it's quiet. It's in every breath you take without fear. It's in every sunrise you allow yourself to see. You are free now. Don't ever forget what it took to get here." I folded the letter and placed it in my old jewelry box, the same one Mark once tried to pawn. Then I looked at the empty space beside it and smiled. That space was for my future, the one no one else could take. Weeks later, I went back to the shelter, not as a victim, but as a mentor. When a new woman arrived, shaking and silent, I handed her a cup of tea and said quietly, "I know how hard it is to start over. But you can, I promise." She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes, and whispered, "How do you know?" I smiled. "Because I already did." Before I end my story, tell me in the comments, have you ever had to rebuild yourself after someone tried to break you? I'd love to hear where you're watching from, and remember, no matter how dark the night gets, there's always another sunrise waiting for you. 3 months after the trial, the seasons changed. The air outside smelled different, like rain after ashes. Every morning, I walked to the Arts Center with a warm cup of coffee and a heart that finally beat steady. I still wore the small silver bracelet my mother gave me, the only thing Mark never took from me. It reminded me that survival didn't erase the past, It transformed it. One morning, I unlocked the art center early. The building was still quiet, sunlight spilling through the high windows, dust dancing like tiny memories. I turned on the radio and started painting a new mural for the spring program. The brush felt lighter in my hand than it had in years. Each stroke was a breath. Each color was a heartbeat. Then I heard footsteps behind me. "Miss Juliet?" It was a young woman I hadn't seen before, maybe 20, clutching a folder so tight her knuckles were white. "Yes?" She hesitated, then said softly, "They told me to talk to you. They said you'd understand." Her eyes were swollen from crying. I turned off the radio and guided her to the nearest chair. "Tell me what happened," I said gently. She whispered, "I left him last night. He said if I walked out, I'd regret it forever." Her voice trembled, but I could hear the strength hiding underneath. I reached out and squeezed her hand. "You already did the hardest part," I said. "You walked away." She looked at me through tears. "Does it ever stop? The fear?" I smiled faintly. "It fades. Slowly. It never disappears completely. But one day you'll realize it doesn't control you anymore." She nodded and handed me the folder. Inside were photos, police reports, and letters she'd written to herself, almost identical to mine years ago. I looked at her and saw a reflection of who I used to be, and for the first time I didn't feel pity. I felt power. That afternoon, as she left, I walked outside to the garden behind the center. Spring flowers were starting to bloom, soft, stubborn colors pushing through hard soil, and I realized something. Healing isn't about forgetting what hurt you. It's about planting something new in the ashes. That night, I sat in my small apartment by the window, sipping tea, when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number again, but this time I wasn't afraid. "Juliet Roberts?" a woman's voice said politely. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Karen White from the Women's Foundation. Detective Harris recommended you. We're building a national program for survivors to share their stories. Would you be willing to speak at our event next month?" I froze for a second. Me? Speak publicly? I almost said no. The thought of standing in front of strangers and talking about the worst years of my life made my stomach tighten. But then I remembered that girl this morning, clutching her folder like it was her last lifeline. "Yes," I said quietly. "I'd love to." The night of the event came faster than I expected. I stood backstage, holding the microphone with clammy hands, watching the audience through the curtain. Rows of faces, mostly women, a few men, all silent and waiting. When they called my name, the applause sounded far away, muffled by my pounding heart. I walked onto the stage, the lights warm against my face, and took a deep breath. "My name is Juliet," I began softly. For years I believed love meant endurance. That if I just loved harder, forgave faster, and stayed longer, I could fix someone who was breaking me. The room was so still that I could hear the sound of someone sniffing in the second row. I told them everything, not in detail, not the bruises or screams, but the silence. The pretending, how Mark would say he loved me after hurting me, how he'd play the hero after being the monster. But when I woke up one morning in the hospital, I said, I realized he wasn't saving me. He was saving his image. I looked at the crowd, and that day I stopped dying for someone else's comfort. A ripple of murmurs filled the room, not pity, but recognition. When I finished, there was a pause, then applause that rolled like thunder. After the talk, dozens of people came to me, some crying, some hugging me. One woman whispered, "Your story gave me courage. I'm leaving tonight." That night, I walked out of the hall and stood under the cold stars, my hands trembling from adrenaline and something new, pride. The kind of pride that doesn't need permission. Months passed again. My life slowly became ordinary, beautifully, wonderfully ordinary. I opened the art center every morning, helped survivors find housing, laughed with friends, cooked dinner for myself. Peace wasn't loud. It was quiet mornings and warm tea. It was locking my own door and knowing no one would break it again. One evening, while organizing donations at the shelter, I found a small box with my name written on it. Inside was a photo of my old house, the one I left behind. The note read, "Demolished today. Case closed." I stared at it for a long time. The walls that once trapped me were gone. It was over, really over. That night, I lit a small candle by the window. I didn't pray for revenge or justice. I just whispered, "Thank you for surviving." Before I tell you how my life finally changed after that moment, tell me in the comments, have you ever had to rebuild yourself after someone tried to break you? I always love hearing from you and where you're watching from. 2 years passed before I realized I could finally breathe without waiting for something bad to happen. The air around me no longer carried the echo of slammed doors or whispered apologies that meant nothing. I had moved to a smaller town on the coast where the mornings smelled of salt and the evenings hummed with the sound of distant waves. There, nobody knew me as the woman from the trial. They just knew me as Juliet, the art teacher who smiled too easily and painted sunsets like she was chasing freedom. Every Thursday evening, I taught a small class for children at the community hall. They arrived in noisy groups, paintbrushes clutched like magic wands, ready to turn blank paper into dreams. Watching them made me remember the little girl I used to be before fear became my shadow. Sometimes I caught myself laughing with them, and the sound surprised me. It had been years since laughter felt natural. One afternoon, after class, I found an envelope slipped under the door. My name was written in careful handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter that began, "I attended your talk 2 years ago. Because of you, I left the man who nearly killed me. My daughter and I are safe now. Thank you for giving me courage." A photograph was tucked inside, her and a little girl holding hands on a sunny pier. I pressed the picture to my chest and felt something shift inside me, something warm and light. It was proof that the pain I had carried for so long had turned into something that could save someone else. That night, sitting by my window overlooking the quiet street, I thought about the word savior. Mark used to call himself that. He'd tell everyone how patient he was, how much he'd done for me, how he'd rescued me from my own weakness. He never realized that real saviors don't leave bruises, they leave light. And now, somehow, I had become the thing he pretended to be. A week later, I received another call from the Women's Foundation. They wanted to publish a collection of survivor stories titled, "The Day I Chose Myself." They asked me to write the opening chapter. For a moment, I hesitated. Writing meant remembering, and remembering still hurt. But then I looked at that photograph on my desk. The woman and her daughter smiling at the sea, and I knew I couldn't refuse. I wrote late into the night, candle flickering beside me, the scent of coffee thick in the air. The words came out like tears, slow at first, then unstoppable. I wrote about the girl who believed love was supposed to hurt. I wrote about the woman who woke up one morning and decided she would rather live alone than die loved by a monster. When I finished, dawn was breaking outside. The sky was a soft pink, like a wound closing. Weeks passed before I received the printed copy. Holding that book felt like holding a second chance. I placed it on the art center's shelf where everyone could see it. Sometimes, women would come in pretending to browse and then stop at that book, reading the first page in silence. And each time, I saw a familiar fire ignite in their eyes, the same fire that once pushed me out of darkness. One afternoon, as I was cleaning brushes, a man appeared at the door. He was older, wearing a dark suit, holding a small box. "Mrs. Roberts?" he asked politely. "Yes," I said cautiously. "I'm from the hospital," he continued. "I was asked to deliver this to you. It was found among a collection of personal effects after a patient's passing." My breath caught. "Who is the patient?" He glanced at the paper. Mr. Mark Roberts." For a moment, the world went silent. The name still had power, like a ghost that refused to stay buried. I took the box with trembling hands. "Thank you," I whispered, though my voice barely came out. When I opened it later that night, inside were only 2 things, a tarnished wedding ring and a folded note. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. It said, "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I told the nurses about you. They said you help people now. Maybe that's your revenge, being everything I wasn't. Goodbye." I sat there for a long time, staring at that ring, feeling a strange mix of grief and relief. I didn't cry. There were no tears left for him. Instead, I whispered, "You're right, Mark. I became everything you weren't, and that's enough." Then I closed the box and placed it in a drawer that I would never open again. Months later, On a cool autumn evening, the foundation invited me to their annual gala in the city. I wore a simple navy dress and carried a small clutch, no jewelry except the bracelet my mother gave me. When I stepped onto the stage to accept an award for courage through art, I saw hundreds of faces looking back at me. Reporters, advocates, survivors. The applause thundered through the hall. But amid all that noise, I heard only the quiet voice in my mind saying, "You made it. You survived." After the ceremony, a teenage girl approached me shyly. "You don't know me," she said, "but I read your story online. I'm still living with someone like him. I'm scared." I took her hand. "You're already brave," I told her softly. "Because you came here tonight. When you're ready, call me. You won't be alone." She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. And in that moment, I realized that my life had come full circle, not as a victim, but as a guide. That night, as I walked home along the quiet street, a light rain began to fall. Drops sparkled under the lampposts like tiny promises. I tilted my face to the sky and let them wash over me. The past was gone, but it had left me something precious, clarity. Love was never supposed to hurt, and saving yourself was never selfish. Before I tell you how one final surprise changed everything for me, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I always love knowing that these stories find people who need them most. A few weeks after the gala, life settled into a gentle rhythm again. I would wake up early, walk to the little cafe by the shore, and sketch in my notebook while the world stretched awake around me. The sea had become my therapy. Its waves were honest. They never pretended to be gentle when they weren't, and somehow, that honesty healed me more than any words could. One rainy afternoon, I was arranging new canvases in the studio when the doorbell rang. I thought it might be one of my students who'd forgotten their brushes, but when I opened the door, a man in a gray coat stood there. He looked to be in his late 40s, rain dripping from his hat. "Mrs. Roberts?" he asked. "Yes," I said cautiously, my heart tightening. He smiled faintly. "My name is Alan Bishop. I'm Mark's brother." The air froze around us. Mark never mentioned having a brother. "I didn't know," I began, but he raised a hand gently. "I know we were estranged for years. I didn't come to disturb your peace. I just need to talk to you about something he left behind." Every instinct told me to shut the door. But something in his eyes, not pity, not guilt, just quiet exhaustion, made me step aside. "Come in," I said softly. He removed his coat and sat at the table, his gaze moving slowly around the small house, stopping at the painting on the wall, a woman standing before the sea. "He used to talk about the ocean," Alan said quietly. "Said it calmed you." I nodded, unsure how to respond. He reached into his bag and pulled out a brown envelope. "This was found with the rest of his belongings after he passed. It's addressed to both of us." "To both of us?" I repeated, confused. He nodded. I didn't open it. Thought it was right that we read it together. I hesitated, then slowly took the envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable, Mark's. For a moment my fingers trembled as I slid the letter out. It began simply, "To Juliet and Alan, I don't deserve either of you, but there are truths I can't take with me." I read aloud, my voice steady despite the storm of emotion building inside me. "When our father died, I kept something that wasn't mine. Money from his estate, a lot of it. I told everyone it was gone, lost in debts, but I used it to build my company. And when I met Juliet, I put her name on none of it. I told myself it was safer that way, that she didn't need to worry about business. The truth is I was selfish. I wanted control." I stopped, my throat tightening. Alan leaned forward, his face unreadable. "Alan, I blamed you for walking away when we were young. I told people you were the reckless one, the ungrateful son. But now I see I was the coward. I hurt everyone who ever loved me because I didn't know how to love anyone right. Juliet, the house by the coast, it's in your name now. And there's a trust account you'll find at the First Harbor Bank. It was meant for you years ago. I just never had the courage to tell you." The letter ended with 2 words that broke me. "I'm sorry." I sat in silence, the sound of rain tapping against the window. For the first time, I didn't feel anger when I thought of him. Just a strange, heavy sadness, the kind that comes when you realize someone understood the truth too late. Alan spoke softly. "I didn't come for anything. I only wanted you to know he tried to make things right before the end." I nodded, tears quietly sliding down my face. "Thank you," I whispered. "You didn't have to bring this." He smiled faintly. "He was my brother, Juliet. I couldn't fix him either, but maybe you can use what he left to help someone else." After he left, I sat for hours staring at the letter. The house was silent except for the clock ticking steadily on the wall. I thought about the years I spent trapped, believing I had lost everything. And now, even after his death, Mark had left me something unexpected, not money, not property, but closure. It wasn't forgiveness. It was the final page of a story I could finally stop rewriting in my head. The next morning, I went to the bank. The clerk recognized the trust document immediately and brought out the manager, who handed me a folder with my name already printed on it. Inside was the record of a modest account, not millions, but enough to secure my art center's future. Enough to make a difference. I left the bank with the same quiet satisfaction I used to feel when finishing a painting, not perfect, but honest. Weeks later, I used that money to open a small foundation under the name The Lighthouse Project. It offered free therapy and art workshops to survivors of domestic abuse. Every wall in that building was painted white and bright yellow, colors that whispered, "You're safe here." During the opening ceremony, I stood before a small crowd of women, children, and volunteers. The mayor gave a short speech, but it was when I stepped up to the microphone that the room fell silent. "I used to believe that surviving meant escaping," I began. "But now I know surviving means rebuilding, not just yourself, but others too. I don't tell this story because I want sympathy. I tell it because someone out there still thinks they deserve the pain they're living in. You don't. You never did." There was a hush, and then soft applause, the kind that carries gratitude more than sound. I looked around at all those faces, scared, brave, hopeful, and realized this was what healing looked like. Not revenge, not justice, peace. That night, after everyone had gone, I stayed behind to lock up. The halls smelled faintly of new paint and candles from the ceremony. I walked through each room, turning off the lights, until I reached the last one, a small studio filled with paintings from the survivors. One canvas stopped me in my tracks. It was a painting of a woman standing at the edge of the sea, light breaking through dark clouds. Someone had written at the bottom, "Because of Juliet, I learned the storm doesn't last forever." I smiled through my tears. Maybe that was what all of this was for, not to erase what happened, but to show that something beautiful could grow from it. I stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars shimmered above the ocean, and the lighthouse beams swept across the water like a slow heartbeat. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the dark. A month passed since the Lighthouse Project opened, and every morning I woke to the sound of waves and laughter drifting from the street below. Women who had once been too afraid to look anyone in the eye were now painting sunsets, laughing with children, and rebuilding their lives one brushstroke at a time. But healing has a strange way of testing you. Just when you think you've found peace, life brings back something you thought you'd buried. That morning, the front desk volunteer told me there was someone waiting in the lobby. He said, "He's your son." I froze, my hand still hovering over the coffee pot. My son, Michael. It had been nearly 2 years since I'd seen him, since the day he chose to live with his father. When I walked into the lobby, I barely recognized him. He was taller, broader, his jaw sharper, but his eyes were still that same deep brown that used to look at me when he scraped his knee and needed comfort. "Mom," he said quietly. "Michael." I tried to smile, but my throat tightened. For a moment, we just stood there, two strangers with too much shared history. He finally spoke. "I heard about the center. I didn't believe it until I saw the sign outside. It's real," I said softly. "I've been busy." He nodded, glancing around at the bright walls and the paintings. "It's beautiful." Then his eyes found mine again. "But that's not why I came." I felt my pulse quicken. He took a slow breath. "When Dad died, they gave me his things. There was a letter inside. For you. But there was another one. For me." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, creased and worn. He said if I wanted to understand everything, I should come talk to you. I sat down slowly, my hands trembling slightly. "What do you want to understand, Michael?" He stared at me for a long time before answering. Was he really the man everyone says he was? The question hit me like a stone. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had once held him as a baby, wiped his tears, baked his birthday cakes. He was your father, I said quietly. He loved you. But did he love you? Michael pressed. His voice wasn't angry. It was desperate, the kind of voice that comes from a boy trying to rewrite his past. I hesitated, then answered honestly. He didn't know how. He sat across from me, silent for a moment, then said, I used to hear things, you know. At night, shouting, glass breaking. I'd cover my ears and pretend it wasn't happening. But I knew, my eyes filled with tears. I tried to protect you. I know, he said. That's why I'm here. He looked up, his eyes glistening. I hated you for leaving. I thought you gave up on us. But now, I think you saved me too. The words broke something inside me. I reached across the table, and for the first time in years, he didn't pull away. He just let me hold his hand. Your father made terrible mistakes, I whispered. But he wasn't all bad. He was a man broken by his own fears. He thought control was love. And when I finally walked away, I think he realized what he'd done. Michael swallowed hard. He said in his letter that he wished he could have been more like you. Strong. A silence settled between us. Not heavy, just full of things we finally understood without words. Mom, he said finally. Can I help? Here, I mean. With the center. My heart swelled. You'd want to? He smiled faintly. You help people who went through what we did. Maybe I can too. Maybe that's how I make peace with him. That afternoon, I watched him walk through the art studio, helping a young boy mix paint colors. He laughed softly, a sound I hadn't heard since he was a child. It filled the whole room with light. Later, as the sun began to set, he stood beside me on the porch, overlooking the ocean. You know, he said, Dad used to say the sea scared him. I smiled. That's because he never learned to let go. The sea doesn't scare you if you stop fighting it. He looked at me, his expression thoughtful. I think I understand now. We stood there for a long while, watching the waves crash and retreat, each one different, but all part of the same ocean. That night, after he went home, I sat at my desk and opened my journal. I wrote, Sometimes love is not about holding on, but about surviving long enough to remember who you were before the storm. For years, I believed my story ended with the night I escaped. But now I knew that survival wasn't the ending, it was the beginning. The next morning, when I arrived at the Lighthouse Project, there was a letter waiting for me in the mailbox. It had no return address, just a single word written in soft blue ink. Thank you. Inside was a small seashell and a note that read, Your story saved mine. I closed my eyes and smiled. For the first time, I wasn't looking back anymore. I was finally, truly free. 2 weeks after Michael started volunteering at the Lighthouse Project, I began to notice a new peace settling over my days. The mornings were quieter, the air felt lighter, and even the smallest moments, a cup of tea, a child's laughter in the courtyard, carried a weight of gratitude. But peace, I've learned, doesn't erase the past. It simply gives you the strength to look at it without fear. That afternoon, as the rain tapped softly against the windows, our receptionist brought me an envelope. It's hand-delivered, she said. No sender. My name was written on the front in a handwriting I recognized immediately. Neat, deliberate, painfully familiar. It was Daniel's. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a short letter written in blue ink, the edges slightly smudged from rain. Juliet, I don't expect forgiveness. But I can't leave this world without telling you the truth. You were right about everything. About the fear, about the control, about the way I mistook silence for peace. When you left, I thought I'd won. But the night you collapsed, I saw myself, really saw myself, for the first time. Not a husband, not a man, just a coward terrified of losing control. I know it's too late, but if you can, remember one thing, the day you walked away was the day you saved both of us. Daniel. I read it twice, my eyes blurring. The rain outside grew heavier, streaking the glass like tears. For years, I had imagined what I would say if he ever asked for forgiveness. Now I realized I didn't need to say anything at all. The letter wasn't a door reopening. It was one finally closing, gently, permanently. I folded it carefully and placed it in the small wooden box where I kept the seashell from the anonymous letter. Both symbols of survival, one from someone I saved and one from the man I survived. That evening, as I locked up the center, Michael appeared in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. "You forgot this," he said, smiling. I took the cup from him, and for a moment, everything felt ordinary, simple. Right. We sat outside on the steps, the sea stretched before us, the horizon glowing with a soft orange hue. "Mom," he said after a long pause, "I went to the cemetery today." I turned toward him quietly. "I told Dad that I forgive him," he continued. "Not because he deserves it, but because I need to live without hate." My throat tightened. "And what did you feel?" He looked at the sea. "Lighter." I nodded slowly. "That's how healing starts." He handed me a small folded note. "He left something else for you. It was in his safe. I didn't want to give it to you until I was sure you were ready." Inside was a bank statement. Daniel had transferred a significant amount of money to a trust fund under my name. The note attached read, "For the lighthouse, not as redemption, but as acknowledgement. I couldn't build peace, but maybe I can fund it." I laughed softly through tears. "Even in death, he's trying to control the narrative," I said, half joking. But deep down, I understood. It wasn't control anymore. It was the only way he knew how to say sorry. Michael smiled. Maybe that's his version of letting go. That night, I sat at my desk with the sound of the ocean filling the room. I looked around at the photographs pinned to the wall, women smiling at art shows, children holding cupcakes at the community fair, the Lighthouse Project banner fluttering in the wind. It was more than a building now. It was a testament that even broken stories could end in light. I opened my journal again, writing words that had waited years to be spoken aloud. Forgiveness is not weakness. It's the final act of reclaiming power, the decision to live without the weight of someone else's shadow. As I wrote, I heard laughter in the hallway, the volunteers cleaning up after the evening classes. I could hear Michael's voice among them, steady and warm. I realized then that love hadn't left my life. It had simply changed shape. Later, when I stepped outside, the storm had passed. The sky was clear again, the moonlight glimmering over the water. I thought of every version of myself that had walked these streets. The frightened woman counting bruises in the mirror, the widow rebuilding from ashes, the mother learning how to trust again. They all lived inside me still, but now they walked together, not apart. A car pulled up quietly by the curb. It was Eleanor, my old neighbor from the safe house. She rolled down the window and smiled. "I heard about your art center. Thought I'd come see it for myself." "Come in," I said, laughing. "You'll love it." She stepped out, a little slower than before, but her eyes still sparkled with the same fierce kindness I remembered. Inside, she looked around at the paintings, the laughter, the light. "You did it," she whispered. "You turned pain into purpose." "Maybe we all did," I said. Eleanor squeezed my hand. "That's what survival looks like, Juliet. It's not about forgetting. It's about building something too strong to be broken again." When she left, I stood by the door for a long moment, breathing in the scent of paint and sea air. My heart felt full, not of regret, but of gratitude for the wounds that healed, for the lessons that hurt, for the love that remained. I turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of the lighthouse logo above the door. It shimmered faintly in the dark, a beacon for anyone still lost in their own storm. Before going home, I whispered softly to the empty room, as if Daniel could still hear me through the wind. "You were right about one thing," I said. I did save us, but I saved myself first, and with that, I locked the door and walked into the night, the sea beside me, the stars above me, and a life finally completely my own. The next morning, sunlight poured through my kitchen window, warm and soft, the kind of light that used to feel foreign to me. I stood there with a cup of tea in my hands, watching the steam rise and twist toward the ceiling. For years I had woken to darkness even on bright days. Now that shadow was gone. The phone buzzed on the counter, a message from one of our volunteers. Mrs. Juliet, today's class is full. Should we add more chairs? I smiled. That single text carried more joy than 1,000 apologies from the past. I glanced at the small box on the shelf, the one with Daniel's letter and the seashell. For a moment I hesitated, then I opened it. Both items lay quietly, side by side, symbols of two opposite kinds of love, one that nearly destroyed me and one that helped me rebuild. I placed them back gently and whispered, "Thank you. Both of you." It wasn't forgiveness for him, not really. It was gratitude for the strength I found in surviving him. The doorbell rang. Michael stood outside, holding a small basket of pastries. "Peace offering," he said, grinning. "I burned half of them, but these survived." "Then they'll taste better," I teased, opening the door wide. We sat at the table, sharing crumbs and quiet laughter. The smell of butter and coffee filled the kitchen, the scent of normal life. He looked at me thoughtfully. "You ever think you'll marry again?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "Marry? No, but love? Maybe. I've learned it doesn't always have to wear a wedding ring. It can look like mornings like this. Simple, safe, honest." He smiled. "Then I hope you get all of that, Mom." After he left, I took a walk down to the cliffs. The wind tugged at my scarf, and the ocean glittered like shattered glass catching the sun. I closed my eyes, breathing in the salt air. I remembered the first night I had stood here, bruised and terrified, clutching my coat as if it could protect me from the truth. Back then, I had begged the sea for answers. Now I didn't need them. A voice behind me broke my thoughts. "Mrs. Roberts?" I turned to see a young woman, maybe in her 20s, standing a few steps away. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "I've heard about your lighthouse project. I don't know where else to go." Her eyes reminded me of mine all those years ago, scared, lost, desperate to believe there was still a way out. I smiled softly and held out my hand. "Then you've come to the right place." She took it. That single touch, trembling and hopeful, was enough to remind me why I had survived. We walked together toward the center, her pace hesitant, mine steady. I could feel her shoulders relax with each step. When we reached the door, I turned the handle and said, "Welcome home." Inside, laughter spilled from the art room, brushes clinking in jars, soft music floating through the air. She looked around in awe, whispering, "It's beautiful." "It's not just a place," I told her. "It's proof that we can build something beautiful from what tried to destroy us." As she smiled faintly, I realized how many Juliets would walk through that door, women who had forgotten their worth, who had been told that love meant pain, that silence was safety, and each time I would tell them the same thing I had learned the hardest way possible. You are not what they did to you. You are what you do next. That evening, when the lights dimmed and everyone had gone, I stayed behind, sitting on the old wooden bench near the window. The moonlight streamed in, bathing the walls in silver. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and hit record. My voice trembled at first, but then steadied. "I don't know who will see this," I said. "But if you're watching and you think you'll never escape, you're wrong. One day you'll wake up and realize the nightmare doesn't own you anymore. You do. And the moment you choose to live, the moment you say, 'Enough,' that's the moment you start over. Don't wait for someone to save you. Save yourself first. The world will meet you halfway." I ended the recording, saved it, and smiled. Maybe it would help one woman somewhere, maybe thousands. That was enough. I turned off the lights and stepped outside. The air was cool, the stars sharp against the dark sky. I locked the door and started walking home. My reflection in the glass door caught my eye. Not the frightened woman I once was, but someone older, stronger, softer around the edges, but unbreakable at the core. At the corner, I passed by a small bakery. The window sign read, "Fresh Start Cafe." I laughed quietly at the coincidence and bought a single croissant. The girl behind the counter smiled. "Rough day?" "No," I said, smiling back. "Just remembering a long one." On the walk home, I passed the old house where Daniel and I had once lived. It was sold years ago. A new family had moved in. A father, a mother, 2 small kids playing in the yard. They laughed, chasing bubbles that floated toward the sky. The mother caught one and spun her daughter around, both of them giggling. For a second I stood still, watching. There was no bitterness, no anger, just peace. Some stories, I realized, are meant to end. Others are meant to begin again, in different hands, in brighter homes. I turned away and walked on, the sound of their laughter fading behind me, replaced by the steady rhythm of my own footsteps. When I reached the cliff road, I looked up at the lighthouse in the distance, its beam sweeping slowly across the dark sea. It blinked like a heartbeat. Steady and alive, I whispered, almost to myself. Thank you for showing me the way. The wind carried my words out to sea, and for the first time in my life, I knew they'd reach exactly where they needed to go, because survival wasn't just about escaping the past. It was about learning how to live again, fully, fearlessly, and without apology, and that's exactly what I did.